Hey humans, how's it going? Susan Ruth here. Thanks for listening to another episode of Hey Human Podcast. This is episode 276, and I had a conversation with Jason Rogers. He's a two-time Olympian, American saber fencer. He won a silver medal in the Beijing Olympics. He is the founder and writer of the Mandate Letters, a contributor to Men's Health on a regular basis, where he explores topics of masculinity and what it's like to be a man in today's culture and society. He talks about his own issues and explores various topics surrounding toxic masculinity, sexuality, just finding one's place in the world as a man, that kind of thing. Really interesting guy, phenomenal writer. I've read a bunch of his articles now, and really great stuff. So definitely check out the links page to find your way to see his work. It's really quite something. I want to take a moment to let Ramona Holloway know that we're all thinking of her. She lost her mom, Wheezy, this week. She was on episode 254 talking about her mom's dementia and what it's like being a caregiver to somebody with dementia. And so I talked to Ramona this morning and just wanted to know that we're all thinking of her and sending love. And just wanted to let everybody know that her mom passed away this week. Okay, in other news, halfway through the new season of Ted Lasso, and my gosh, if there's ever a show that can pick you up, it's that one. I know it's cool to make fun of people that love Ted Lasso because, the joy stealers are out there, but I gotta say, it's a heartwarming, that's such a perfect description of it. I feel good when I watch that show. And you can't take that away from me. That's all I'm saying. All right, in other news, social media, Hey Human Podcast can be found on Facebook and Instagram. My own personal social media is Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter under Susan Ruthism. You can find Hey Human Podcast on all the podcast places. Obviously, you're listening to it right now. But if you want to go check out heyhumanpodcast.com, you will find the links page where every episode gets its own pile of links about books or articles or just general information about my guest. Check that out. Wealth of information there. Rate and review Hey Human on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts. If you want to sign up for the mailing list, SusanRuth.com is where you do that, SusanRuth.com. And you can find out more about me, all my other projects and things that I do, interviews with me from that people interview me instead of the other way around. I put all that stuff up there. In fact, I've got a new interview up there from Dove Barron and his Curiosity Bites podcast. I will put those links on the SusanRuth.com site for sure. Okay, what else? You can also find the storefront where you can get merch, t-shirts, pencil cases, tote bags, that kind of thing to help support Hey Human and to, give a little swag. All sorts of fun things on the store. You can also donate if you think Hey Human should continue to be ad-free. I don't have a Patreon or anything like that. At least I don't yet. There's no paywall. There's no ads. So if you love what you hear and you feel like supporting it monetarily, definitely check out the donation button. I think it just says support there on heyhumanpodcast.com. And I appreciate it. Thank you. All right, I think that's about it. Oh, you can email me, Susan@heyhumanpodcast.com. I answer every email, and I look forward to hearing from you. All right, that's it. Thank you for listening. Be well, be kind, take care of each other, and here we go. Jason Rogers, welcome to Hey Human.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks for coming over.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to be here.
So you are in California proper, I take it?
Yes. Yeah, I actually grew up in Los Angeles.
Unicorn!
Yeah, I know. And left after high school and then went to college in Ohio, moved to New York, moved to London, and then now my wife and I are back here after many, many years away, but I've been here about 4 years.
So growing up here, is that how you know our mutual friend Jeff?
Through fencing, actually.
We will get into that.
Yeah.
Shout out to Jeff, though, for introducing us.
Yes, thank you, Jeff.
Hi, Jeff. If you're listening, which you probably are. This isn't live, by the way. I'm recording this, but we're going to pretend that he heard us in real time.
He heard us. I felt him say thank you.
Somewhere in the force. Yeah.
He gave me a high five virtually.
There you go.
In the spiritual realm.
There you go. Exactly. Childhood. What was it like for you? I know a little spoiler alert for everyone. You were an Olympian. It's very exciting. I imagine that growing up with that on the horizon, it was an intense childhood, or how was that?
It was both intense and not intense. So I grew up, as I mentioned, in LA, specifically West LA. I was incredibly fortunate. I'm an only child, so I had, I relished in the attention of my parents, and they're two lovely, wonderful human beings, supported me in every way that they possibly could. Sent me to private school. I went to private school over in West Hollywood, and then later moved to another one over in Brentwood, so incredibly privileged in that regard. And I started fencing at a pretty early age, about 11, at a facility kind of over in the old Helms Bakery building, which is this beautiful sort of LA historic landmark. That center no longer exists, and it's all furniture companies, but it was a very cool place to kind of be immersed as a young kid. There was, coats of arms on the wall and pictures of old fencers and, like black and white images of the Princess Bride and just all of the, arcana of fencing that would draw somebody in, knights in shining armor and things like that. And I had a knack for it kind of in the very beginning.
How did you find out that, though? It seems like a rather obscure sport to think, unless you are watching The Princess Bride and you think, oh, I can be the Dread Pirate Roberts.
Yeah, I mean, it is, I should point out, not just a random sport to get into in the United States, but a very random sport to get into in LA. There are some centers out here, but the East Coast is kind of the epicenter for fencing as a sport.
An no, sorry, I'm just not even going to do the joke. I trip over myself.
There'll be a minimum of 6 fencing puns.
Yeah, as my brain went, don't do that, Susan. I tripped over myself.
That's okay. I permit them. I support that. I appreciate it. I'm a pun guy, so make all the puns that you
Lord.
like. But yeah, so I actually almost quit fencing immediately because it's very technical. It's a very, very technical sport. And I was 11 and probably somewhat ADD and just this is no thanks. And then they switched me from one coach to another. And I met a man named Daniel Costin, who's from Romania. And he was just the coolest dude around. Just funny, this big bear of a man, bearded, deep booming voice, always cracking jokes. And I was this guy's great. I don't know about fencing. This guy is awesome. And I did it for about a year and a half or so. Started doing little competitions here and there. And then I went to my first national competition for the under 13 age category. And I won.
Did that surprise you? Did you have an idea that you were going to be good at something like this?
I had no expectations. I mean, I don't know what expectations really are at that age, but I don't think I had a sense that I was really good, and I don't think I had a sense that I was bad. I was just doing something I was enjoying, and then all of a sudden this kind of this measuring stick came and showed me oh, I guess I have something here.
Does that mess you up? Because I think if you're doing something for the joy of just doing it and enjoying it and having a ball and just happen to be great at it, and then someone says, oh, you can win at this, or you can get an award for this, or you can be the best in your class or the best in the world. I mean, that's got to be a lot of pressure.
So initially, I think it's helpful because it becomes a positive feedback loop that you study harder when you get an A kind of situation. And so for me, that was I like this and I'm good at this and it's fun to win tournaments. And then so it became this momentum creator. Eventually in my career, the measuring stick became an oppressive force and something that I had to learn to deal with and to develop a lot of kind of tools, especially when it came to the Olympics and then my second Olympics, that period in between, my first games in 2004 in Athens and the second games in 2008, that I had to really learn how to adjust the framing, of how I saw that kind of stuff.
When you say to learn the tools, was that something that someone helped you with, or did you come to that of your own volition?
A lot of, both. I sort of, without skipping too far ahead, my first Olympics was a really challenging Olympics. I went...
That's just a funny sentence. I'm sorry. Really?
True.
Was the Olympics challenging? How weird.
Weird that you would go to, this sporting event.
With the greatest people in the world. And
watched by millions and had a difficult time.
So bizarre.
So weird. Anyway, that's my unique story. No, I guess to put it in perspective, like, you go into it with the expectation that or not expectation, with the aspiration to do well. Like, every athlete dreams of winning a medal at the Olympics. And it's the culmination of your career, of what at that point in time had been a decade of training. And I went into my first match. I was competing in two separate events. One was a individual event, or sort of Jason Rogers represents the United States, and then a few days later, would fence for the team, sort of like me and three other guys representing the U.S.
Is that more pressure to be representing the whole of America in a team way? Because you have people to let down besides...
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
All depends on your perspective. And there are some fencers that really rise to the occasion in team events, and there are some that rise to the occasion individual, and all depends on how you think about how those different environments and like sort of vectors of force, like pressure, affect you. So in some cases, as an individual, you're just like, well, if I lose, I lose. That's me. It's on me. No, it doesn't impact anybody else. And that allows people to thrive. And then if you are in a team event, it's like, ooh, I don't want to let my teammates down. And that becomes like something that drags you down. Conversely, it can work the other way around. If you think about like, oh, my teammates are there to lift me up, you feel less pressure and you can take the type of risks that you need to take in order to perform at your best, and then vice versa. So it's all, sport, this is going to be like the most reductionist thing you've ever heard me say, but like, it's all in the mind. Obviously it's the body and the training, but when you get to a certain level, it's like how do you shape your perspective in a way that keeps the pressures at bay, that continually allows you to kind of tap into your highest potential as an athlete and actualize that in moments where it matters. And that's obviously like when you're at a place like the Olympics.
I had a neuroscientist on here a couple weeks ago, Dr. Moran Cerf, and he talked about how the brain and our general capacity is operating maybe at a certain percentage where it still has quite a lot of room to go because it doesn't want you to push yourself so hard. And then for elite athletes, they figured out how to push the brain beyond what its fail-safe is. Mm-hmm.
I think that's got to be true on some level. It's probably not exclusive to sports. It's probably like performance
I'm sure.
of all kind. And I think that like there's probably some connective tissue between that and like focus. Because I think one of the things that a performer of any kind, but in particular an athlete, learns to develop is just the ability to focus on one thing and nothing else. Or really a sort of like an interlocking system of things that are relevant to you and your sport, but blocking out the rest of the world. And then, so to that extent, like you are maximizing your, I don't know what really the right word is, but your ability to sort of like visualize something and make it happen. Like I think that ultimately comes from being able to like really drill down your focus like a super magnifying glass on something. So
as a little or a young man who's growing into becoming a champion person and you're hyper focused and nothing else is at the forefront, what does that do to your childhood? Well, so, and this is what I was alluding to before, I had a very intense childhood and a very normal childhood simultaneously. And I almost had two lives. So life one was just being
a kid in high school, and, you know, taking tests and writing papers. And I mean, my school is like a super college prep school, so I had a lot of schoolwork, and I wasn't really cut a lot of breaks there. So I just was like everybody else. And then on the other hand, I would, you know, sort of like flit off to France for the weekend, and Italy for the weekend, and Poland for the weekend. And I would go to the Junior World Championships, you know, every year during my birthday, because it was in April for 2 weeks.
April birthday!
Hey, Aries.
Wait, I'm a Taurus, April 23rd.
Okay, I'm 14. So.
Hey.
So in that sense, like there was this like bifurcation between these two identities. And so I felt very much like a normal high school kid, and at the same time, like, oh, I'm doing something very special. And I knew that it was special. Oddly enough, it wasn't really recognized by my high school and peers until I really got some momentum. For example, I had to do, most athletes at my school, if they were playing varsity sports, they would like get to not do physical education.
I was just going to ask you about PE. Did they make you do PE?
They made me do PE until I was in, finished 10th grade. And so I did I was like, but I'm like on the national team for my sport. And I'm like, I'm being funded to travel around the world.
I don't want to play dodgeball.
Right. I was like, can I maybe like get a free period instead? And they were like, no. And then finally, I think I got the United States Fencing Association to write a letter to my school and say that I was like an Olympic hopeful or something like that. And they were like, okay, fine. You can not do PE.
Classic.
Yeah, classic.
But you'll have to do Saturday school.
Right, exactly. Yeah, you're not getting a break on any of your papers, and you're still going to do everything that everybody else did. But yeah, and I think, so in that sense, it was a pretty normal childhood. I started at that age to like, I don't think I was aware of it at the time, but I started to kind of have some anxiety type stuff that was slowly bubbling underneath the surface, like as, you know, like I was in 10th grade and 11th grade and, you know, everybody was on the kind of hormone roller coaster and dating and experimenting with all that kind of hookup culture type stuff. I kind of shied away from that. And that was definitely a part of my development that I think probably is different from a lot of kids. And we can talk about that part too.
Yeah, totally.
Well, yeah. So I guess like, I mean, one of the biggest things that came with being an Olympic athlete was a certain kind of expectation about who I thought I needed to be in the world, both as a person, but also as a man. And, you know, like, oh, okay, I'm like, I have to put forward this kind of image of, I don't know exactly what to describe it, but like a strong, capable man. And for me, you know, when I was a teenager, like especially late teens, kind of as I was finishing high school, like sex, relationships, intimacy, all that stuff did not come naturally to me. You know, my first girlfriend, for example, like I just kept having experience after experience with her where I would like struggle to perform sexually, and I would feel really anxious about it and feel like all this shame, like there was something wrong with me because every other person in high school was like having, you know, a great old time just experimenting.
Or at least they were saying they were.
Exactly. Yeah. And that's right. And that is exactly the point, which is that because you think other people are having normal experiences and you're not, you don't share that with other people. And so
that must have fed in itself too, because I imagine to be such an elite athlete and with a sword, no less, if that's not a great metaphor, and then have that other stuff being going on, that's like a crazy irony.
Totally. And I compartmentalized it for years and just kind of took my focus off it and put all my focus on fencing. I was like, okay, and school actually. I was like, became super studious about school when I went to college. And that became the two sort of like aspects of my life that I poured basically all of my energy and my creativity into, because, you know, one, I wanted to succeed in those realms, but two, because it became like a compensation mechanism for me, because I felt sort of inadequate or not enough in that realm of my life. And so that was an undercurrent that, you know, began in my teen years and like sort of during my upbringing, but then as I got into university and then when I started training full time after college, that's when it really started to take, the reins and kind of affect my, both my athletic and my personal life even more.
Did you find the sport to be hyper-masculine, or was that self-imposed?
Fencing, as compared to other sports, I don't think I would say is hyper-masculine, but whenever you talk about the realm of competitive sport and men compared to the general populace, that in and of itself is a hyper-masculine environment. Mm-hmm. So college, I went to Ohio State, which is a Division I school, so it was a lot of dudes with a lot of, swagger walking around campus. So I was sharing locker rooms and spaces and resources with a lot of those people. And so just by virtue of being, I think, adjacent to that kind of environment, and then in it when I got to the sort of Olympic level, it was this like constant, it's like the water that I would swim in.
Did that make you question your sexuality at all? Or
yeah.
Yeah.
Definitely. I think probably in my like early mid-20s, for one, when I was growing up, like I would get attention from the opposite sex, and then I wouldn't, in some cases I would reciprocate it flirtatiously, but oftentimes I just kind of would stonewall or pretend like I wasn't aware of it, because I didn't know how to respond, because that part of my life I was so just not myself. I didn't know who I was in that arena. And so a lot of people would say like, oh, he must not, he must be gay, or he must not know who he is sexually, or whatever. And so I think I heard that enough times that I started to think like, oh, is that a question I should really be asking myself? And, that sort of lingered under the, sort of somewhere in my consciousness throughout my career. And then it wasn't until after my fencing career, like when I was like 26, 27, I was stopping. I hadn't stopped fencing, but I was stopping fencing. I knew I was kind of like on my way out. But I was like, yeah, I should really explore this. And I did. I dated some men, and I was like, like, this is really cool. These are wonderful people. I understand like that I can now form connections with people romantically, sexually, etc. I don't think this is me exactly. That doesn't self-identify. I don't self-identify as gay, but I definitely gave me an appreciation for sexuality as a spectrum, and understanding that, I can move through those spaces depending on, who I meet. Mm-hmm. And it so happened that I met my now wife, and I was like, oh, this is a person I want to be with. But I'm grateful for those experiences. I'm grateful for that, like, in a way that issue invited me to challenge, I think, some of the pressures or gender norms that might have prohibited me from, exploring that aspect of myself without that, kick in the butt that I needed to be like, okay, I really should figure this out.
I feel like a lot of the hypermasculinity comes from a fear that if they don't put on that jacket or that mask, that they'll somehow be gay. Oh my God, if I think this guy is intriguing or interesting, or I like the shape of his body or whatever, that and so they compensate for it and punch a guy in the testicles or whatever the hell men do. Totally.
And now that my like sort of work and writing concern masculinity or masculinities plural, it's so transparent, or so easy to see that a lot of those unhelpful behaviors, which are often sort of like classified as toxic masculinity, like those come from men being afraid of being sort of put in the category of feminine. And so whether that be gay or a sissy or whatever, there's many labels that manifest for that kind of that arena. But men constantly have to prove themselves or prove their masculinity to each other, because it's other men who teach them what masculinity is, and it's other men that police it as well.
That's interesting. And also the idea that being a bisexual person is because I hear the talk of the town that, oh, the guy who is bisexual is just waiting for the last stop of Gayville or whatever. And just like with women who are bisexual, the answer is always back to men. It's always like, oh, she really likes guys, but she dabbles in women. It's so interesting to me.
Yeah, and I think bisexual men are definitely. I think there is still a stigma that is attached to them, and I think a lot of bisexual men would say that because it is kind of like, yeah, it's perceived as sort of like you're just saying this because you don't want to say that. But I don't know. I mean, it's really interesting. I would say though, I actually don't identify as bisexual because that I want to leave space for the people that really do. I think the way that I think about it is, 9 or 8 or 7 times out of 10, if I live my life again and I met the person that I wanted to spend my life with, probably more times out of, like 7 or 8 out of 10, I'd probably end up with a woman, but it could be a man. And I think that's what I mean when I say, like, I appreciate the gender spectrum, but I don't want to self-identify that way because I feel like I'm taking the oxygen away from the people who really do and who really want to vocalize that identity as their own. Yeah,
I didn't get a sense that you identified as bisexual, but I think it's great that you appreciate the spectrum of it all. It's sort of, if you grow up in a culture that tells you you're supposed to do a certain thing, like let's say I grew up in a culture that only ate sandwiches at that one particular sandwich store, great sandwiches, oh my God, best sandwiches you ever had in your life. And then someone says, well, I make sandwiches. Do you want to try my sandwich? And you're like, I don't know. This is my sandwich. And then you try that sandwich, you're like, holy shit, that's the best sandwich I've ever had. Or you're like, you know what? That was a good sandwich. Still like the sandwich I've been eating my whole life.
Yeah.
I know it's a terrible metaphor, but
no, I mean, but I think it's accurate in my case. And it's funny because it's like, there's on one hand, I'm like, I really don't want to clarify this because there really shouldn't be any need to. No, but on the other hand, and I think it really does come back to like, like just making sure that space and representation is being given to people for whom that is a core part of their identity. Whereas for me, it's more peripheral and a part of my life experience.
Totally. And I agree with you. And also, I don't know why it matters so much.
Right.
Now, I know that's part of your conversation and stuff that you write about and talk about and all that kind of thing. But I will forever wonder why anyone cares who anyone sleeps with, as long as everyone is safe and not doing something against someone's will.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's true with any kind of anything that goes across the board. So
no, I agree.
Yeah,
I agree. But a lot of people in the world feel that they need to actively challenge or debunk other people's ways of living because it's a threat to their own. It's a threat to their own.
I agree with
identity or way of life,
or religion, or philosophy, or or what their dad taught them.
Right.
Let's get back to, so you graduated from high school, and you were on a fast track, which was a long track, but we call it a fast track because it's like
fast and slow track.
Yeah, overnight. It took 10 years to be an overnight sensation, or 20 years. Or
right.
Whatever. Yeah.
I graduated from high school. I went to the Ohio State University in Columbus, Ohio.
On a scholarship?
On a scholarship.
For fencing or for?
For fencing.
Okay.
Well, actually, it was like
I don't know why I keep doing this.
No, I like it.
I keep doing the on guard.
We need some, straws or something.
I know.
We can joust. I was actually half academic, half athletic, and which is in part why I kind of became quite, I don't know, maybe studious is the right word in college. But yeah, I went, and it was funny because I had a really difficult decision, I don't know, sort of like path, like a fork in the road at the end of high school where I'd wanted to go to Columbia, like for my, entire sort of like high school aspirational life, where I was like, you're thinking about college, and I was also in this private school environment, which very much sort of like brainwashes you into thinking that going to Ivy League schools are the only types of schools you can go to. And, applied and was very blessed to get in. And then there was a coach that I had been working with in the summertime, named Vladimir Nazimov. And he's a many-time Olympic medalist, Olympic gold medalist in fencing in my event. And he was like, wait a second, why didn't you apply to Ohio State? Or I had applied, but he's like, why aren't you taking Ohio State seriously? And I thought more about it and eventually kind of came to the conclusion, I really want to go to the Olympics. I want to try and go to the Olympics. And for me, I felt like going to New York City, going to what I would refer to as sort of the fencing industrial complex. There's a lot of clubs in New York and a lot of talent, and a lot of all my teammates that were also in the same pathway as me were training there. But I just felt this weird connection with him, and he provided me with the emotional support blanket that I think I needed. He was constantly being like, you're going to be the best in the world. You're going to be the best in the world. And I think I needed at that stage in my life that kind of someone believing in me as much as I hoped I would eventually believe in myself. And so I sort of pivoted in the very last minute, and I was like, all right, we're doing this. I'm going to Ohio and I'm going to figure this out. And I went, and I was like, oh my God, it was a huge culture shock for me to be in Ohio and to be in football culture. And I was there for a year and a half. Then I ended up taking a year and a half off to train for the first Olympics, and was just full tilt training for, quite a long time. And it was really challenging actually to do only one thing for basically 18 months. You forget that when you're in high school or when you're in college, and you're spinning a lot of plates, even though you're busy as hell, you basically are able to shift your focus from one thing to the next. So if you're doing well in one thing but not doing well in another, you can kind of get good energy from the thing you're doing well in and be like, okay, that thing's going to go okay later. There's a sort of mental balancing act that you're able to do even if you're just swamped and exhausted. And what was interesting was that I thought I would have all this time to train, and I would be just free to just get better at fencing, to get my mind in the right place for the Olympics. And it was the worst year ever, because all I did was get up, go to practice, come home, watch reality TV because I was so exhausted I couldn't do anything else. And if I had a bad practice, I would stew on it, and ruminate about oh no, I had a bad practice, what if I don't make the Olympics, and so everything became about this one question, this one threshold that I had to cross. And it was tough. It was really, really tough. And I didn't have at that point the mental tools that you develop or should develop as a young athlete to kind of reframe and to understand how to be mindful of the feelings that you're having in your body that result from these types of cyclical thoughts that can come up and really drag you down.
It sounds like you're not the only one, though. A lot of the mental health talk that's been going around this Olympics, that perhaps you're not alone in that struggle. It sounds like everybody is dealing with that on some level.
Definitely, yeah. And I think, that's one thing that I'm really glad that got a lot of airtime this Olympics, and actually to a certain degree prior to the Olympics, because there was a documentary that Michael Phelps produced and was in along with a lot of other really, sort of famous Olympians, like Shaun White and Sacha Cohen and others, talking about what they sort of called a mental health epidemic among Olympians, because there have been some very prominent suicides of Olympians, and just dealing with the pressure that comes with being put on that stage, kind of turning yourself into a performance machine, and when the machine isn't working properly, the type of sorrow and shame and things that can come with that. And then worst of all, the incapacity that is felt by many Olympians to ask for help. It's they're I have to put up this sort of fierce front, and if I show any weakness or vulnerability, it compromises me as a competitor. And
or my teammates or the nation.
Well, and competitors and teammates are often the same people, which is why it's very tricky.
Ooh, that is tricky.
Right. So, the people that you travel and compete with are often vying for the same spot that you want. And then when you make it, you and whoever else made it become a team. So they may be friends, they're friends, competitors,
that is tricky.
and teammates all at once. And so that dynamic becomes really hard to understand, like when to make yourself vulnerable and when to not make yourself vulnerable.
Did you form bonds with people then? Or did you find yourself sort of from your upbringing keeping them a bit of a distance and focusing just on what you were doing?
I bonded with people earlier on because I don't think I didn't think about that. The chess match didn't really start to unfold in my head until adulthood, young adulthood, my sort of, 20s, I would say.
You look 20 now, by the way.
Oh, thanks.
I keep going like, how old could this guy be? He's talking about his 20s like they were so long ago.
I'm 38.
Okay, you look way younger than that.
Oh, thanks. Appreciate that. So I did have some very close friendships that I didn't treat them like any different from any of my other friends. That being said, as a young man, making yourself vulnerable in general is a hard task. But I wasn't being any more or less vulnerable with them than I was with friends back home. I think as I got older and the Olympics raises the stakes, I started to put my guard up a little bit more. Also, many of my teammates were a lot older than I was, so I think I felt a natural kind of not quite being in the same life stage and not quite knowing how to talk to them. And also just feeling like there's a certain degree of a protective bubble that you do have to put around yourself because you're sort of vying for your own success, in some cases at the expense of theirs.
Were you able to turn to your parents, or was that another level of I don't want to let them down or let them know that I'm hurting or in this vulnerable place?
So I think I was pretty good or pretty vocal about asking for their emotional support when I was struggling with fencing. So I would come back from a tournament, or sometimes it would be at the tournament. My mom would often travel with me until I was about 20, 21. And, I would sort of lose it, if I had a really tough match or something like that. And they would support me in that regard, and I would let them know that I was upset. But the other part of my life, the sort of sexual performance anxiety issue that I was dealing with, that was not something that I really talked about with them, or in the very few instances that I did. I sort of began to broach the topic, and it felt really weird, and I just sort of receded back into my shell, and it became something that I just locked away in a box, and was like, okay, well, I guess that confirms my fear that I can't talk about this because I'm gonna be made to feel even worse than I already do.
There's so much stigma around men and sexuality and performance. I imagine it's like women with orgasms or something. I just imagine that it's got to be tough to find someone that, as you're talking, won't feel threatened themselves by what you're saying.
100%. And the few instances when I did sort of crack that wall open, and I was like, I'm kind of struggling with this a little bit, and then you get the I don't know what to tell you. I don't know what to tell you, man. Sorry about that.
That's not me.
That's not me. That's your problem.
I'm hard as a rock right now.
Exactly. I mean, there is this cultural perception that men literally have to walk around with a wrench between their legs or something like that. And so deviating from that in any way, none of my friends were like, hey man, I struggle with this stuff, or I've had some awkward experiences, or you know what, I'm sorry that happened to you, or that you're feeling that way. I don't judge my friends for that or my teammates for that. The very few that I did talk to about it. because they're working from the same cultural programming that I was. So, that's, I guess, maybe why I talk about it now, because I want to, as much as we can, like, start to help deprogram that out of men, or unlearn it, maybe is a better word.
How did you get to the other side of it?
It was, I kind of got shoved to the other side of it. I will take a lot of credit for realizing that I was in a pretty dark place after my second Olympic Games in 2008, because I had basically more or less achieved, like, everything that I wanted to achieve. Like, my 3 teammates and I won a silver medal in Beijing, and after just this, like, ridiculously emotional day of, winning multiple matches by the slimmest of margin, and having it be kind of like a reverse image of what had happened to us in Athens, where we had come very close to medaling but did not. And there's a very different experience that happens at the Olympics when you win a medal, because many doors open up for you that previously weren't open. You're invited to events, you're invited to galas, you're sort of seen as a temporary celebrity, unless, except for those that are actual celebrities like Michael Phelps and Simone Biles. And so I was, like, kind of tasted what that felt like, and it was like everything I thought I wanted, and yet I was, like, really miserable. There was a layer of, like, stimulation and excitement on top, and then there was, like, just, deep sadness underneath, because I was like, oh my God, I've been working for, more than a decade to achieve this, and now that I have it, I don't feel any different. I still feel like I'm not enough. And
nothing like an existential crisis in your 20s.
Exactly. Oh yeah. I mean, everyone has them, but this was like such a sharp, piercing realization that I had. I was like, oh my God, like, is this, like, okay, like, it just brought into perspective that achievement is not how you find that sense of self and identity. And so, yeah, I, like, started to ask that question more pointedly in an action-oriented way, like, what can I do? And I started talking to people. Like, I talked to my dad finally in a meaningful way about it. And my dad was like, oh, I wish you would have told me this, like, 10 years ago, because I struggled with this too when I was younger, and my dad was married before he met my mom. And he's like, there was a period after, I ended my first relationship that I was just, like, really struggling with this. And I was like, oh my God, if I would have had this kind of mirror to reflect this kind of stuff back at me when I was younger, I think, like, I could have probably avoided, like, 75% of the shame. And the shame is ultimately the most corrosive emotion. And
it feeds into itself.
Right.
Yeah.
It becomes a perpetual cycle.
Yeah.
And I, like, started to, get professional help, engage meaningfully in relationships, not kind of like this weird dip your toe in and see if things are going to explode. And then if they do, just run away, which is basically my general approach to relationships before that. And slowly over time, a period of probably 3 or 4 years, like, things kind of started to mend themselves. And then from there, it's not like it was fixed. It was a constant, gardening process of just, like, finding new resources, reading new books, like, trying to deepen intimacy with my partner. Eventually, like, I ended up seeing like a medical doctor that helped me figure out there was some kind of hormonal component that was probably playing a factor. Yeah, and you just kind of, like, I just sort of worked my way through all of it rather than running away from it, I guess.
I think that's a big thing too, that fact, that people don't realize what a complicated mechanism we are. And just a tiny imbalance in one direction or another can set a whole chain of events that might not be favorable for ourselves, and as far as functioning in all the aspects that we are supposed to be functioning as a fully operational robot,
Totally. One bad event, and I think many people have memories of these types of events, often in an early age. If your interpretation of events is particularly negative, or you ascribe blame to yourself where you shouldn't, it fragments who you are, and it's like you're, like, going through life. Everybody that knows about the event that occurred is like, oh, that probably wasn't a big deal for that person. And then here you are like veering off on some other path thinking that this thing was the worst thing that could have happened to you. And it's not until you start talking to people and correcting your thoughts and assumptions about like what actually happened, who was responsible, how I should actually feel about it, that you begin to return to reality and might actually be some organic version of yourself.
Yeah, that was a hard one lesson, is realizing that firstly, most people don't even think about you. You're like sitting there obsessing over something you've said or done or looked like or felt or whatever, and the other people or person didn't even notice. And you've gone off into, the wonderful world of I'm the worst ever.
Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah, unfortunately, like we are like narcissistic beings, totally. Like as much as we'd like to think that we aren't, and there are some that are more than others, but even self-loathing is a narcissistic act because it puts you at the center of your universe, and we get energy from that. It's not good energy, but we get energy from it nonetheless.
Yeah, I think for a lot of us it feels comforting to be in a state that we recognize. It's a lot easier. It's a lot easier to wear that than to have that shift the way we think and maybe try something, dip our toe, as you said, in the sea of feeling good about ourselves.
Yeah.
That's weird.
Yeah.
Yeah. And also there's that other side of the coin where people are told, oh, if you feel too good about yourselves, you're an asshole. So where's the balance?
Yeah, it's a constant balancing act. But I think, that initial, it's so counterintuitive because you're like, of course, I should love myself, right? Like, because it's like, that makes complete sense. But it's also, it's often a sea change from the way that we view ourselves, because just to a certain degree, being self-critical actually breeds change, right? It's like, oh, like I should do this or I should do that. But it's when that like laser beam gets like real hot and strong that it starts to be unhelpful, and you can't see to the other side of being like, oh, maybe I should be nicer to myself, or maybe I should give myself, like a break about the fact that I wasn't my 100% best self in that moment. But it's hard because those are patterns, the same way that like, muscles learn how to perform movements, like the brain learns how to repeat thought patterns, and we, like it's not like we can untrain our muscles that easily.
It's a hard thing to push through. It really is. It takes, and even when you can push through it and you do push through it, it's still easy to falter and go back to the familiar.
Totally.
Yeah, it's wild. This thought just occurred to me. Do people ever talk bad about themselves in dreams?
That's a good question. I mean,
I know that you have things acted upon you in a dream and everything in the dream is you, but an actual literal, you're the person in the dream thinking, I'm a piece of shit or whatever. I don't think that happens.
Maybe like symbolically, someone's giving you a critique and that person is representative of yourself.
Right, but I mean self. The self being, the part of self is being played by you today. Not the part of you being played by, your uncle or your schoolmate or something like that.
Oh, that's a great question. I don't know. Maybe you just unlock the key. It's like dream therapy.
Yeah, maybe.
It's like just live in your dream.
This is a dream, by the way.
Oh, great.
Yeah.
Well, it is a simulation.
Probably.
So.
Yeah. When you watch the Olympics now, does that cause anxiety, or are you able to chill out and relax into it?
It's a little bit of both.
Mm-hmm.
I think I thought going into this Olympics in particular that I was far enough out, and I've done so much work and I've written about my experiences, pretty extensively. And so I was like, I'm going to just like glide my way through this one. I'm going to be like the sort of elder statesperson pontificating about what it all means and whatever. And I was pretty triggered, honestly, by a couple of things. One was watching some of the other American athletes have a difficult games. Some of the guys that compete in my event, which is men's saber, were poised to do really well. And unfortunately, things didn't go their way. And I remember in particular one of them, I could hear the microphones in the arena were still hot, and I could hear him talking to his coach, and he was so distressed about losing in one of the earlier rounds. And it took me right back to my first Olympics, losing to a veteran Italian fencer, like as bad as you can lose to somebody, and just like literally losing my mind. Like I remember going back through the sort of tunnel to the practice room, and NBC reporter stuck a microphone in my face. I have no recollection of that exchange except for that a microphone was in my face. I was trying to hold it together, threw all my equipment off, found my mom, was in a back dark like alleyway in Athens. I literally I had the most explosive cry that I think I've ever had in my entire life. And I don't know what events followed his, the ones that I'm describing, but he was teetering on the precipice of something like that, and it just took me right back to that emotional place. And
can you reach out to people like that since you've been there to say, hey man, I totally feel you? And I
have reached out to a couple of the athletes that I know better, that I competed with that are younger, but sort of we overlapped because not that all I can really do is just be somebody that listens and maybe understands a little bit what they're going through. But, sometimes it's tough. Sometimes it's those people need to ask for other people they need to invite people in. I don't want to, poke and stick myself in places that I'm not necessarily welcome. But otherwise, the other thing that triggered me for sure was the whole Simone Biles incident and the resulting sort of conversation, both in the media and social media about whether she made the right decision or didn't make the right decision. And, from my perspective, she was so, such an amazing example of strength to
absolutely
step back and be like, hey, I'm not feeling right. I'm putting myself in danger. I'm potentially jeopardizing my teammates. I don't think I should.
Which is the most leadership thing to do.
It's like the fact that I try and talk about this in a measured way, but the fact that you could have any interpretation besides that, it really hurts me. It makes me really go I don't understand how your interpretation could be any different. And so feeling like a somehow peripheral to that conversation, and with my own kind of struggle with I guess mental health issues throughout my career, but also preceding, during, and after the Olympic Games that I competed in, I was just like, oh my God, I can't believe how callous and just not thoughtful some people are, and they just fire off these kind of projections about what they think people should and shouldn't do based on the fact that they quote unquote signed up to go to the Olympics. I'm just okay, I don't know what to tell you if that's what you think, but I guess everyone's entitled to their opinion.
The guy who is out of breath walking around his block, but that's a whole other story.
Yeah, I mean, it's
the Twitter trolls are just evil. Yeah.
Right, of course, and that's a dark place to go, you know, just in general, because it's not even about Simone Biles. It becomes just about being inflammatory for the sake of being inflammatory, and what motivates that, who knows? But I don't know. I guess I think that the number, there was 3 distinct aspects about her decision that I just feel even though they were vocalized by her, maybe not as clearly as they could have been, but with those combination of things, for you to not be able to conclude that was a really cool thing was ridiculous. One I mentioned, which is that she was literally putting herself in danger, right? Me as a fencer, I'm not really putting myself in danger by continuing, so that, the fact that she was able to vocalize that and make a decision based on that is incredible maturity. The second is that she felt like she was going to compromise a medal for her teammates, that's leadership, as you said. But the third is that I think people think that she just made this decision as if it was cavalier, right. Oh, I don't feel like it. And it's do you understand that Simone Biles, her entire life is gymnastics? She's waited 5 additional years from her first games, basically sacrificed the ability to figure out who she really is and how she wants to navigate the world as a person, and just discover her own identity she's put all that on hold so that she can be a gymnast and deal with injuries and pressures and the sort of...
And be the best GD gymnast, you know?
Right. Totally. But this for her...
There are things named after her. She's so good.
Exactly. And the idea that she wouldn't have factored in like this enormous sacrifice that she's made. That's a huge sacrifice.
Yeah.
I mean, she's put more skin in the game you can possibly imagine, and making that decision is even harder because of that. And it was like, I just couldn't believe that people were like, you know, like you have to. A real champion always perseveres. And it's like, okay, I don't.
That's that programming that you're talking about.
Exactly.
That's that toxic, it doesn't have to be masculine, it's just a toxic environment that is the culture of humanity.
Totally. Yeah, and then I think we have, I mean, part of it was inflamed by, or I guess exacerbated by the fact that, you know, social media is now driven by opposition and antagonism, and so everybody's hot take was trying to be increasingly, you know, like provocative, and all of a sudden we end up in this weird echo chamber where people are shouting at each other with really extreme views, and it's like, oh my God, like I can't believe that this is supposedly a constructive conversation.
Yeah. Do you still fence?
I don't right now. I did. So after the Olympics, when I decided to retire, it was actually a couple of years after the Olympics, because I was initially thinking I might try and go for a third, and decided that was a very bad idea for a lot of the reasons we've talked about already. It was just like, I got to do work on myself. I got to figure out who I am. And I had a clean break with fencing. I didn't fence. I didn't pick up a saber really for 6 years.
Wow.
I put my equipment in my bag, zipped it up, literally left it in a, you know, I don't know, my parents' attic or something like that. And then when I was living in London, and it was like around the time of the 2016 games, and I was kind of like started to get an inkling that, oh, maybe like I was probably feeling a bit adrift in my career, and I wanted to connect with something that felt really familiar, both from a skill set standpoint and a community standpoint. So I started fencing a little bit then, and then moved back to LA with my now wife, and got to be back like in my original environment with Daniel and his club, and his son was at the time fencing at a pretty high level and needed a training partner. So I fenced with him for about 1.5 years on and off. But then I was like, you know what? I just like surfing better. So now I spend pretty much all my free time that I dedicate to like fitness doing surfing stuff, surfing related stuff.
That's fun.
Yeah.
I'm terrified to surf.
It's so fun though. I mean,
I'm sure it looks incredible. I love to watch it, but I think that scares me.
I mean, in fairness, there are a lot of things to be afraid of. You know, the ocean is this uncontrollable force. You know, which is why people surf. Yeah.
Yeah.
And yeah, I got to spend like 5 months in Hawaii this last year. So you know, brought additional connection with it.
Are you going to do it competitively or just for fun, for your spirit?
Definitely for fun.
Yeah.
I know better than to try and compete, because it'll take all the joy out of it for me.
For sure.
And I still have to be very conscientious to like not engage that part of my brain that I can engage sometimes, which is like, I got to be as good as I possibly can at this, and just sort of breaking things down into all of its component parts so that you can put it back together again and make some tiny marginal gain, because it's very effortful, and it takes a lot of time and energy, and it taxes your sort of like, I don't know, it taxes the joy factor, I think.
How did you, when you met your wife to be, before you obviously were married to her, how did you get around your gatekeepers in your brain?
In what regard? In the sort of like
letting go to let God, as they say, to let things play out. You know, to let her in, to let the person, you know, that tells you how everything's going to go wrong, or that you shouldn't trust someone, or, you know, all this stuff.
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think like, so I was living in London at the time, working for an advertising agency, and she, unbeknownst to me at the time, worked at the same agency in the Amsterdam office. She's originally from Stockholm, and had sort of been working there for a couple of years. And I got sent over to work on a project, and we met within the first 5 or 10 minutes of me coming to work, that first day. And I was like, who is this person? Because I don't know what it is about you and your energy, but I couldn't take my eyes off her or something. And unbeknownst to me, also, I guess she was feeling similarly, and she claims that she sent an email around to some of her female coworkers that she was claiming dibs or something
hilarious
on me, and which if I would have known at the time,
she's got the elephant gun, tags you in the ear.
Totally. If I would have known at the time, I would have been so excited. But she proceeded to invite me to lunch with a bunch of other people as if that was a regular thing, which it was not. So she kind of orchestrated this faux group lunch that was really about us getting to spend a little time together. And then basically after that,
I like her.
Yeah, she's definitely, she's an eye on the prize kind of person. But I don't know how to explain it beyond the environment that was just a byproduct of the fact that I was there for a short period of time, the fact that we very quickly connected, because it was within a week or something like that. We had transcended the sort of employee colleague relationship, and I don't know, it just everything felt so natural. I had never been able to let anybody in that way, and all these seemingly really challenging decisions or walls that you think of as being taking relationships to the next level, hey, I really like you, or I really want to spend more time with you, or hey, are we gonna be, is this a thing, are we now a thing, to saying I love you, to, in my case, deciding to finagle my way onto some other project that allowed me to basically stay in Amsterdam for another 6 or 8 weeks just to have more time for us, not because I wanted to work on the project. All those things were just I didn't even think about them. It was I thought about them obviously, but I didn't think about them with the gremlins that normally sit on my shoulder and are whispering, unhelpful things in my ear. And I think we just moved at such a quick velocity that I almost they couldn't catch up. And by the time we were at a point where I had to go back to London, we were pretty solid and knew where we were trying to go. So it was a few months of me going there and her coming to London, and then she was ready actually to move on from her job there and just move to London. And it was oh, okay, here we go. 6 months later, we're doing this.
Wow.
So it was magical in that regard. I'm so grateful that it happened that way, because at one point in time in my life, I never thought that would happen. I was just well, I guess I'm just one of those people that's gonna sort of drift through life solo, and and not that there's anything wrong with that, but it's more I wanted something else, and it was more that I felt there was something with me that would prevent that, and it's sort of that kind of melted, and that was really nice.
Isn't that interesting to think, kid in LA grows up, does all this stuff, and you end up in this obscure moment, and there she is.
100%.
That's wacky and great, and makes you wonder, And
not only that, but we also talk about the fact that if we would have met at different stages in our lives, it probably wouldn't have clicked. It wouldn't have worked. And so it's timing and lighting, it's all kind of, I guess that's the mysticism of it. I don't know.
Yeah, for sure. What got you started with the writing and the decision to do the mandate letters?
Yeah, so
which is a great name, by the way.
Oh, thank you. I started thinking about writing around the time of the 2016 games, which was also when I was thinking about fencing again, because I saw some of my old teammates competing, and I just felt I don't know, there's something unfinished here. I don't know what it is, and I want to explore that. And I had also, prior to that, thought about I liked my career at that point, I mean, advertising is a very creative industry. Like, I was very blessed and I was on a great trajectory. But I just something wasn't quite feeling right to me. And yeah, I had done some writing in the past, nothing of any note really. And I basically kind of started what later became a memoir project, where I initially kind of was writing about the Olympics through the lens of dealing with performance anxiety in sport. And then there was at a certain point, my wife, Martina, was like, hey, maybe you should write about that other stuff. And I was like, no way. Absolutely not. And then I came around and realized that was actually what I had to do, whether I wanted to or not, because it was, like not only a way of processing my own experiences, but it was where that was my story, like that's what impacted me throughout all those years. And it was the thing that I had to share. And so I continued writing about it and, working on a manuscript and, trying to figure out if I could get a book like that into the world. And then I wrote an article about it for Men's Health as part of one of those kind of stepping stones. And that really was what kind of sent me off on this different trajectory of doing, I guess, kind of like first person experiential essays and features about things concerning masculinity. In particular, I've been writing about men's groups a lot. And the mandate letter is just another manifestation of me putting my thoughts together about, where are we going on this masculinity rocket ship? What are all the types of like expressions of masculinities, and, what kind of representation do we need, and how do we need to kind of get men to unlearn certain aspects of, sort of masculinity culture, quote unquote. And yeah, the book that I was working on remains in a drawer, and my literary agent and I are going to, pursue that at the right time. But right now I'm just kind of, I feel like I've grabbed this thread of the sweater and I'm just pulling at it as hard as I can, because it feels, I'm exploring, I'm learning, I'm enjoying it. The work seems to be, being well received and hopefully impacting.
You're an excellent writer.
Oh, thank you.
Having read a couple of the articles, or would you call them articles? I mean, I know they're essays. Having read a couple of the essays.
Articles, stories,
yeah.
I don't know what quite the right word is. Like, the mandate letter is more, sort of all over the place in terms of format. Some are interviews, some are just sort of like, thoughts, some are, sort of like, meditations on something. But my work for Men's Health, I've probably written a half a dozen or more things for them. Those are, a lot more goes into those. In some cases, those are like 2 or 3 month projects. And so those are like articles, features, essays.
How are those things being received? For example, the article you wrote about sexual journey, and the article about it looks like you're writing, like you said, a lot of trying to have men sort of consider that the story they've been told maybe isn't the one that they should keep listening to. That's got to be challenging for a lot of people.
Yeah, it is. And the first essay that I wrote, and that's the one I was referring to, the kind of like brief summation of my kind of story, these like 2 separate lives, right? The one where I was the sort of, insecure, uncertain, person in sex, intimacy, and relationships, combined with, the presentation of myself as a young, confident athlete, Olympian specifically. That piece was, really well received. I mean, I'm sure there were some conspicuous silences from people in my world, but very, very few. I think the lion's share of people that did reacted in a way that were like, wow, this is really cool. Like, we need more people saying stuff like this, because this is, just the statistics on sex, sexual performance anxiety, erectile dysfunction among men is like absolutely absurd. Like it's the reason that businesses like Roman and Hims, which if you're familiar, they're telemedicine businesses that help men get
The little blue pills and stuff.
Yeah, exactly.
Isn't that interesting, too? We are the world, it's not just America, the society that if there's something wrong, instead of finding out what might be the underlying cause, we just say, take this pill and ignore everything else. You'll be fine.
Totally. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we have a commercial incentive to pharmaceuticalize everything. And
what is strange, I have to interject, is the idea that you were in advertising and your full-on job was to convince people they maybe need things that they don't need, or that they're not good enough and that this will make them better, or, all that kind of stuff that goes along the lines of what advertising represents.
Yeah, it's another strange tension in my story, I think, is that, I understand in a pretty detailed way, like how those types of campaigns come to be. And I've never worked on anything that was, in my opinion, outright harmful. But, I've worked in consumer products, mayonnaise, for example, right? And you're like, do we need everyone in the world to eat more mayonnaise? If you like mayonnaise, great. But we don't need to force it down people's throat necessarily. But it gives me perspective on. I told you they were going to come up. It gives me perspective on the power of advertising as a cultural vessel. And it's partially why I think that, men's perspective about masculinity comes from initially the immediate people around them. In most cases, men, brothers, fathers, uncles, teachers, coaches, mentors, etc. But the sort of, that incubating sort of stuff around that is movies, books, toys, advertising, and that stuff, we could probably do better, in terms of not perpetuating certain kinds of stereotypes that ultimately are harmful to everyone, not just men.
Sure. We are a closed system onto each other. So men and women, we operate together regardless of our gender, our identity, our sex, or whatever. I think that's one of the biggest hurdles that human beings have to get over, is the idea that we are separate in any way.
Totally. Absolutely. In the work that I'm doing now, the term the patriarchy kind of comes up frequently, right? It's the sort of systems of power, or the structure in which we all live, that where men have kind of systematically over the years asserted their kind of dominance. And it's oh, well, that's really bad for women, and so men are not incentivized to change that system because, they benefit from it. And one of the things that is so interesting is that they don't benefit from it. It hurts everybody, right? Everybody is a victim of this kind of unbalanced system. And a lot of these things that we've been talking about, men policing certain kinds of sort of behavioral necessities on each other, and men constantly competing for status, all that's a product of the patriarchy. So to that extent, it is a closed loop system. We're all in it. It's the water that we swim in, to use the phrase I used before. And, we could probably do for a better system.
Yeah, let's hope so. I appreciate that you're trying. As am I. I mean, this work is the same. It's trying to show how similar we are. And that you can exist in a world where men open your door if you want that, and cry watching a movie with you if you want that. I don't know where that separation... Do you remember the Hedwig and the Angry Inch? From way back. It was a musical. I just remember it was part cartoon, part musical. It was really well done. But I remember this cartoon about the separation when men and women used to be one being, and then it was severed. And we spend our whole lives trying to find that other half. And I find it interesting because in that, it's referring to a whole nother person. But I think in the truth of it, is it's us. We're trying to find that other half of ourselves that we have denied or turned our back on, or, are scared of, or whatever it is, that's the whole, the male and female working together. Not penis, vagina, but male, female, energetic thing. Totally.
And it's there are all these human qualities that on some level we all have within us. Some are stronger than others, and we tend to lean towards others because we've either been gotten positive feedback or negative feedback to avoid certain kind of things that other people like, are like, don't express that, like, be more this than that. And, I'm borrowing ideas from other people in saying this, but like, oftentimes we like gender those qualities, we say like, oh, being aggressive and assertive is masculine, right? And being creative and spontaneous is feminine, right? But the reality is those are all human characteristics. And so to some extent, like, even saying that those are on some kind of, one side of the net and others are on the other is like kind of problematic, especially because men are sort of anti-feminine in stance in general, right? We need integration of all those things. And for a person to be the highest, most integrated expression of themselves, like, they need to just pick from that garden all the things that are really representative of who they are, whether or not they're masculine or feminine or whatever culture tells them they should or shouldn't be.
Yeah. That'll be the day, huh?
That'll be the day for sure.
Yeah. Before you came over, I was just perusing the mandate letters again, and there was a thing about the rings, the tattoo that you got. And it struck me, a long time ago, I interviewed a guy who he's a heart transplant recipient. He was a first responder. His name is Jeff. It's a great interview, great guy. And he got his third heart because he got sick with the first heart because he was a first responder in 9/11, got sick. They had to give him a new heart. That heart failed, as they often do. And now he's on his third heart. And I said to him in the conversation, do you want to meet the family that you've received the heart from? And he said, I don't know that I'm worthy. And it was a lot to hear that, because I thought, my God, if anybody's freaking worthy, it's this guy. He's run into burning buildings trying to save people's lives. He's represented and protected presidents. He's, if not that guy, then who? And then hearing that echoing in your article about how you felt about getting a tattoo that I from what I've ascertained from you, is a lot of Olympians get. Can we dig into that just real quick?
Yeah, definitely. I think, so it's very common for Olympians of all descriptions to go sometimes before, but mostly after the games and put the rings, which is some sort of like representative of the process and the event and the importance of this thing that has kind of loomed over their lives. And for me, like, especially after my first Olympics, which had gone sort of, in my mind, what I judged as catastrophically, I was like, it doesn't feel right. I don't feel like I can put this representation on my body, because exactly like the man you're describing, like, I didn't feel worthy of it. I felt like I had let everybody down. I had sort of like showed the promise of possibly being able to, be quote unquote great. And then I had sort of, shit the bed, or whatever the right expression is. And that's not a fair characterization of my performance there, but it's what I thought. And so I carried that with me for a long time. And even after the 2008 games, which had gone measurably better, I don't know why, I just still was kind of like, nah, I don't know. And later it became clear that it was because, in general, there was a hole in me around not feeling like I was enough. And it had a lot to do with learning to love all aspects of myself, even the kind of shortcomings that I felt like I had in the bedroom. And when I kind of was able to heal that, the idea began to form in my mind, like, oh, like, maybe there's a reclamation in taking back that symbol, as something that I should be proud of, because really what that symbolizes to me is that it's like the putting your mind to something, to overcoming obstacles, to loving something enough to even have that ambition in the first place. And so, I just decided, you know what, I don't care. 12 years later, 13 years later, if you count the extra year for COVID, 17 years later, if we're going back to Athens, like, I'm going to just do that because that means something to me, and it like brings some level of closure, and in the same way that writing about my experiences has. And yeah, I want to look back on that period, and I want to be proud of it, and I want to understand that all the things that didn't feel good at that time somehow brought me to this point where I am now, and delivered me to, you know, like the opportunities that I have to like try and say interesting, meaningful stuff about what happened to me and what I hope won't happen to other guys in the world.
A full circles moment. I had to do it.
That was good. That was a good one.
That's really beautiful. How empowering of a moment. That must have been emotional.
It was. I mean, it's funny because like on the masculinity front, like where I need to be, where I still have a lot of work to do is letting in emotion and feeling it and expressing it and not processing it through the old channels that I used to, which is often geared towards like, oh, I'm feeling something. This isn't helping me perform optimally. I'll deal with that later, like a cataloging system.
Yeah.
So on some level it was, because I've made a lot of strides in kind of like deprogramming that kind of emotional control. But on the other hand, like, you know, what emotion I did feel, like sort of like shunted off into, you know, these reservoirs in my brain where I hold that stuff. And so it seeped in kind of later. It wasn't in the moment, you know, like getting the tattoo, for example. It was more in writing about the experience. I think I process a lot of my emotion through writing, and probably why I'm doing what I'm doing now. And because I'm able to think about it in a way that helps me just really understand like what the experience was and what it meant to me. And yeah, it's so yeah, I don't know if it was like emotional in the traditional sense, but it was emotional in the peripheral ambient sense.
Yeah, it's really beautiful. How can people find you, Jason?
Thank you for asking that. I mean, all of my work, I guess, is on men's health. You can sort of track me down there. As we talked about earlier, I write the Mandate Letter, which is like a sort of weekly-ish, bi-monthly newsletter about a lot of this stuff we talked about, masculinity. And that's at the mandateletter.substack.com, or just Google the Mandate Letter.
I can put links to on Hey Human Podcast.
Yeah.
There's a links page, so.
Yeah, and then I'm on social media, you know, in the typical places.
Yeah.
Twitter, Instagram, etc.
I'll make sure all that information is easy to find for everybody that's listening. Thank you so much. This has been wonderful.
Thank you for having me.
Really great conversation.
Talking about it.
Yeah. Thanks for listening, everybody. Bye. Rate and review Hey Human on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks. Bye.